Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Coaches Rising podcast. It's all about how you can become a more effective, more powerful coach. And today I'm going to be speaking with Richard Strozzi-Heckler, who has been in the field of coaching, personal transformation now for over 4 decades. He's developed this beautiful somatic coaching methodology. It's really exquisite. He's worked with the Navy SEALs, he's worked with the US government, he's worked with Fortune 500 CEOs, and he's a real master coach. But we're not going to be talking about that today. Today, we're going to be talking about coaching from source. And we really explore that, we get our training and our tools as a coach, and those are really great. They're really a fantastic foundation. But at some point, they start to get in the way of a deeper conversation, a deeper level of coaching. That need to get things right, the need to get somewhere or to use our tools, they create a barrier to this deeper level of dropping into an immediacy and an intimacy with our clients. So in this session today, Rich is going to share about how he does that. How does he prepare himself to enter this powerful space? Like, what kind of practices does he do? And he's going to share about how does he start to sense into his clients in a way that gives him powerful information beyond purely the rational and the emotional and physical sensational level. He can tune into a deeper level of information that really supercharges the coaching conversation. So I felt really privileged in this conversation. I thought that I'm really speaking to a master coach here, and he's sharing the intimacy of how he coaches. So Richard's on the faculty of our upcoming Coaching from Source program, How to Be a Transformational Presence. And that's enrolling now, and I'll be back at the end of this video, this audio, to tell you more about that. So enjoy.
About 12 months ago, I noticed that a lot of people who I was speaking to were pointing towards this place place beyond our training and our methods and our even our coaching persona that we could access. And I want to speak to you today about that space. We could use different words to describe it, but for me, it's been when I've accessed that place, there's almost a kind of surrendering in, a letting go of an outcome of where the coaching might go, really meeting in presence, allowing something even to come through our coming together and our connection together. And I'm curious how this speaks to you, how you would respond to what I said.
This idea that we will embody, or we will be in touch with something that is what I would call beyond the self, or beyond our rational thinking and our logic, has always been very, very compelling to me. And I realize that at some level, the teachers that I've sought out in retrospect have always embodied that, have always lived that, and either explicitly pointed to it and taught it, or implicitly revealed it through what they were doing. So it's a subject that has always been keen for me. And there's 2 things that come up. One is that many, many decades ago, in writing my PhD dissertation, I saw a video. It was a series, and it was called On Life. And one of these series had to do with protoplasm. Now, right away, it sounds not so interesting, but it was this notion of a camera looking on a Petri dish, and here was this, a piece of protoplasm, and then they put another piece on it, and all of a sudden they began to relate. These 2 single cell organisms began to relate, and they started to warm up, have motility, and move towards each other. And then, of course, when they touched, it was a little bit of a question like, am I the meal? Are you the meal? You know, that notion. But it was what struck me was that, of course, we're 98% protoplasm. We're very complex beings, but that's one of the fundamental makeups of the human form. And that when these two were placed in a similar environment, what wanted to happen was them to come together. And that began in me a whole looking and viewing about human beings and contact, and our clarity in contact and our lack of clarity in contact. And what does this mean as a deep fundamental urge to move towards life moving towards life. And we can do that a number of ways. And most of us spend time with a lot of other people. We can be in nature too. We can have the sky over our head. But what does it mean as we move towards life, and how do we join up there in a way in which we can make something bigger than just these individual parts? So that was kind of really the beginning for me at one level of going, oh, even I can look at science, and science will reveal to me this notion of moving towards moving towards life. And once we get together, can we build something that's actually even bigger than that? The other piece, Joel, for me is that my experience has revealed to me that we're all actually cut out of the same cloth. That once we take these filters down that we call personality, persona, a set of competencies or skills or status, and we take those filters away, that the lens of perception open, and we begin to see that we're actually not just in concept interconnected, but that we are actually part of this beautiful, elegant web of life together. So inside of that, those things, and in working with people, it has always been my intent and research to go, how do we touch into that deep wisdom? We can call it a biological wisdom, a psychobiological wisdom, somatic wisdom, you know, a perennial wisdom that, that when we open into that space, that we create openings and possibilities that wouldn't previously been there.
A beautiful answer. And so tell me, like, maybe for people, you know, listening, like we're talking about something pretty big here. And I wonder how that shows up for you, you know, as you're sort of working with somebody, as you're sat opposite them, stood opposite them. How does that kind of, that space start to show up for you?
There's actually a process that I go through in which I will empty myself. Let me just put it that way. That I will empty myself and become as open as possible. And that requires that I allow the world as I would know it and order it to actually collapse. In other words, of course, I come in there as a role. They're compensating me in contemporary terms through certain kinds of currency. That they have pieces that they want to work with. They have their forsake of what are their conditions of satisfaction. And I will, before I go in there, I will kind of sit with that and then let it all go. And it's an internal process that I do, and that allows, from my experience, a deeper connection with the person, a deeper listening to them, and it includes the overall ecology, the overall space in which we're existing together as we're sitting there. And that practice that I do comes from, I think, having great teachers, and great teachers pointing ways in which to connect with this deep knowing. Let me just call it a deep knowing that's beyond the self. It's beyond our logic, rational mind, etc. And that it takes a set of ongoing practices that one does. In other words, when I speak about this or when I teach this in our courses, I really lay the foundation for this is accessible to all of us. I would hold that it's in our DNA. I would hold that it's something in the complex system that humans have that we've developed over time, where we can feel how we are one with another, feel what we're one with life. And that has to be discovered. In other words, it's not just an idea. It's just not a belief system. It's just not something that I would aspire to. It's actually something that one needs to take on, I would say, long-term practice, so that we can discover that and then have access to it in a more fluid way.
It's interesting because I get the sense there's a paradox here that actually, you talk about emptying out, that that through this practice there's been an unlearning or an undoing or an opening to some kind of experience, and sensitizing yourself and letting go of another part of you that may have been perhaps covering up that experience.
Yeah, and I would say those social conventions, the social procedures and protocols that we both adopt and inherit. So it's clear for me that when I started working with people, really as a body-oriented psychotherapist many years ago, and with people that I train now, is that you want to do well, right? We don't get up in the morning and say, this is a great time to make mistakes with my client. No, we go, I want to do well. And it's a natural part of us. So we might do our homework about who they are, what we do. There's probably some anxiety because you're meeting a stranger and that are putting a lot of faith in you. All of those pieces inside of it. And then probably we've been trained in some methodology. And in that methodology, we want to take those steps. All perfectly, I think, good, and all perfectly along that line, the line of doing well. And it is true that at some point, the requirement is to begin to let all that go. I used the word before, like, in other words, that world that we formed, or that world that we disclose to ourselves, we have to allow that to dissolve or to collapse and to begin to go to that particular well or oasis of that deeper knowing.
Yeah, because what starts to emerge as that part, as we let that part of us go, what comes in its place? And I mean, I know you have been speaking about this, but I'd love to kind of like see if we can create more distinctions around instead of, for instance, looking at someone through your training and maps and theories, or maybe even feeling that impulse of like, I want to get them somewhere to do well, there's something else there. Yeah.
In the traditional Japanese arts, Japanese martial arts, and specifically Aikido, which I train in, is that there's a word called kimusubi. Kimusubi. And kimusubi means you tie into your partner's energy. Now, that doesn't say much as we're speaking here, but really it points to this notion of sitting into somebody. So like musubi means knot. It means knot. And so how do you make a knot between yourself and the other person? Not like bound or overbound, but you become one piece. And what that means is that if I start to become free of, these are the moves I have to make, here's my methodology, and I directly and immediately begin to see, for example, the color of the person's eyes, their breath pattern, the feeling of the sensation of my seat on the seat of the chair, what is the rhythm or the sound of their voice, the tone of their voice. And those things, those physical components, from my view, are a doorway into really feeling this field, this energetic field that somebody lives in. And then from there, what are the qualities of that field that they begin to exhibit, or how they express that through this field. So now we know in the West that we live in an electromagnetic field. And that electromagnetic field lives in the field of the energy field of the planet, which is gravity. And we know that if we align our field with the field of the planet, then we have a greater partner. That's a great partner to have, is the whole planet. And we're not fighting it. It's really the same way in which we do this with another person, is that we begin to allow our attention, energy follows attention, our attention to flow out towards this other person. So it's not a matter of scrutinizing them. It's not a matter of making smaller and smaller distinctions. It's really the notion of allowing them a meeting place where we can come together and begin our work together, our conversations together, our way of interacting together. And at the same time as we do that, we can also learn that my energy is flowing out, but it doesn't mean I'm merging with them. It doesn't mean I'm giving up everything that I care about. It doesn't mean that I no longer have a center and they're the center of things. That we begin to learn that I can be present, open, and connected as a felt sensation, and at the same time be connected to other in a way that there's a unifying principle that becomes to become more and more apparent to us. Mm-hmm. Now, these distinctions, like you said, I totally understand that we want to have these finer and finer distinctions of these kinds of things. But in some way, it's as simple as you go out in your front yard, or you go to the park or backyard or wherever it is, and there's something there that's living. There's a bush, there's a rose bush, there's a tree, and you can stand in front of it. And as you begin to quiet yourself, you begin to empty yourself, it's possible to feel the life coming from that other living thing, even though it may not be moving, even though it may not be your dog or your cat that can be active, but something that to the common eye is apparently very still. And it's those kind of practices, that I believe, which is necessary.
Mm-hmm. Well, because in a way, that part of me that says, yeah, I want to make some more distinctions, that could be the very analytical mind, that wants to know more theory, or it wants to, so that, and then I can, strengthen that part of me and make it work, But actually you're talking about a different space, which is like a relinquishing of that. And what, so I love this description you give, of just being with that tree or the bush, and just sensing or quite emptying out and feeling. And then presumably you'll start to feel some ripples, or there'll be a sense of the livingness of that tree or the bush. Or if we think of a person, maybe there'll start to be a sense of them or an imprint of them in some way.
I think too that when we begin to engage in ourselves that way, that a different level of perception will begin to come to the foreground. So many of us see eidectically, we see in images or pictures, and then we make sense of that. Some of that we're clairsentience, where we feel it in our bodies. Or other times we may even, I know people that see things in terms of mathematical formulas or graphs even, that don't really come from, I'm thinking about this, it's what appears. Some of us might hear a voice that speaks to us. So inside of that, one of the things that's important is that we begin to see what is the lens out of which we begin when we reach a deeper space and we begin to connect with other in a deeper space. what comes out of that? How do we begin to order that in a sense? And when I mean order, I don't mean we go back to the rational self in speaking, but it may be, oh, there's an image that appears, or a picture, or a voice, or a feeling in the body. And then we begin to work with that and trust that. And all the way from, you could say to a client, I notice when you're talking about this, that either, I feel this gripping in my stomach. So I'm wondering, am I picking that up from you? So in that way, we begin to learn these things. When I did very early on in doing a lot of hands-on body work, I still do that. But when doing hands-on body work, there'd be a moment where I would, in my touch, I would wonder if the person was there or not. Mm. And so I would ask, like I'm working on the feet, and I would say, are you still with me? And they'd go, oh, I just drifted off. And that way I began to see that, oh, I'm actually picking something up. Now, how was I picking it up? So as I did that more and more, I realized that when they said that they were drifting off or they weren't there or thinking about something else, I realized I felt lonely. Now, I'm very clear that they're not there so I won't feel lonely. But it was a way in which I self-experienced myself to going, oh, that's what's telling me that they're not there. I don't bring them back so I don't feel lonely, but I go, this is the ground we need to work with then. Does that make sense when I say that?
It totally makes sense. Yeah, it's really clear, very clear.
Yeah, so it's that place where it's really incumbent upon us to begin to understand our process. And inside of that process is to going, oh, this is how I access or I receive or pick up information or cues or the cares and concerns of the other person. And they may not be able to articulate it. I may not be able to articulate it, but it becomes the ground in which we go, that's our doorway to enter into. Mm-hmm. And two things about that I'll say is that one is that, yes, we're moving away from what we've learned, our methodology, those kinds of things. And in the very beginning, we want to build a ground there. So I've seen a number of people who would say going into the helping professions or working with people in anything from managing or leading to being a coach or a therapist, they go, I want to go there first. And it's been my experience, what we do is we need to build a ground, a very strong ground. So in one of my disciplines, the martial arts, for example, someone goes, I want to learn how to protect myself. So how do I block something? And I will say, well, first of all, let's talk about how you need to stand or how you need to breathe or how you need to feel yourself while you're feeling your partner or opponent or whatever that is. So for most of us, that's a very important step to take, that we don't leap over that. We really know how to cross our T's and dot our I's and be fully present. And then from being fully present is then to let go. Mm.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that, because it's like, it seems important there's a level of rigor and discipline, and that, this isn't just kind of some fluffy, flimsy kind of ideal, but actually, no, it's built on this very solid ground that you talk about. That there's like lots of experience that's been embodied, and then there's a very solid place from which there can be a deeper surrender, or perhaps deeper listening, a deeper opening to the unknown, to being open to the unknown.
Yeah, this piece of, like, you use the word rigor, which I would hold to. I think for the great majority of us, that's really important to have a lot of people that you work with. This notion of dropping into a deeper space, you can do that anytime in any conversations with the person at the checkout line at the market, for example, or when you're working with your children. I used to, when I put my kids to bed, I would go into that space And would that help us all relax more and let go into sleep? So there's, wherever we are is the opportunity to begin to practice that, I believe. And I think that, so inside of that rigor, there's also, it's kind of rigor and wisdom, huh? And that we build that foundation really strong. And we see a number of different kinds of people in different places. So we have a vast point of experience. And then there can become a place in which we have a different longing, and that longing may come about because of a certain restlessness or something like that, but a place in which, you know, we might even say, gee, I feel like I'm just impersonating myself. And there has to be more than this, or I know that I can add more value here, and I either feel stuck or I feel somewhat afraid that I'm going to step over boundaries here or something like that. And then it's that opportunity for us to rely on our practices, our teachers, our supervisors to go, no, there is this next step that moves us towards mastery.
Well, because that brings up for me because I recognize some of this in my own experience where, you know, there's an element of risk which is perhaps becomes more important. You know, there's a certain safety that starts to and a familiarity in my rigor and my training and my coaching persona, you know, my professional persona. And it's a great thing, but at the same time, it can start to kill intimacy or create distance, you know. And somehow there's you know, there's a deepening yearning for risk, like to not be reckless, but to dare to kind of, you know, to meet spontaneously or to open. And it almost feels like that's where I can access more, like a level of mastery, you know, like the word I was thinking of was genius, but mastery, I think, you know, where there's a kind of becoming a conduit or something, like there's a kind of what's the word I'm looking for, like I want to say cleanliness, but it's like there's less friction, something's just coming through more freely. And that can have more impact, like so I don't know how that.
No, I think really what we're talking about here is this notion that this space that we're calling source, or calling a depthful knowing, or a deeper connection, that number one is that it is something that is indigenous to us. It's actually inside of us, and that what we're looking at is how to reveal that. Now, I think that also people become self-selected there, because there's a number of people that what might see this offering that you have and going, no, I have this good methodology. If I follow the methodology, it works.
And it's just to interrupt and say, you're referring to the Coaching from Source program
yes. Yeah.
later on this year. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool.
And then there's those of us who have a certain kind of restlessness. And we feel a certain urge or a longing that there is, I can only use the word more, there has to be more here. And the more, as I accept, would eclipse my I. So there can be less I and more of the more. And what my job is to do is to open to that and to merge with that. It's actually, I think in many ways, it's a very kind of deeply felt love, where we know that this thing that is animating me, or this knowing that begins to come through, is that I can surrender to that, because it evokes a certain kind of love out of me, and a love in which I want to connect with the other. Even love like a sense of a greater architecture or a greater harmony. And that allows us to go, no, I can allow myself to sit at the end of the table now, and to let this other flow of love in contact and connection to begin to move forward.
Mm, mm. Well, I like that word because, you know, in a way we've been talking about a certain presence or deeper knowing, or even like the mystery of who we are, and it's and how that can somehow be beyond our more kind of sometimes limited sense of who we are. You know, maybe some people might say egoic sense of I, and you know, in my spiritual training and stuff and history, like there was often an emphasis on like there is no self, you know, there isn't anything here, and I think that's a very powerful perspective.
Mm.
And it's also there's something as I've like grown, I feel like there is also something which can come through me uniquely in some way, you know, that is my contribution in some way that isn't like limited in an ego, you know, in the way that some of these traditions talk about it. And there is an expression of love, but it has a kind of almost uniqueness through me. And so when you talk about love, that's what comes up for me, that there's like it somehow connects like that transcendent perspective, but also like that we're human beings as well at the same time.
It makes me think of the 13th century Zen priest and writer poet Dogen.
Mm.
And he said to be on the way, to be on a path, is to study the self. And to study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be one with all things. Now, that's my paraphrase. But I think that really is a very lucid and concise description of this kind of path. Yes, we want to be on a path of awakening. And on this path of awakening, we want to see how we can serve others. And what that requires is we study who am I? Who am I? And once we get very deep into that, we might, he used it was translated, forget the self. But we see that, oh, there's something even more than the self, or beyond the self. Or as we look at the self, we might say, in some traditions, it's empty. And then from there, we begin to feel and be with the connection of the 10,000 things, or the connection with all of life. And so if that happens without this sounding overwrought, is that what we can allow to come through is that level of life, that level of connection. And of course, then we have to do our own personal work to go, do I have the shape or the form or the being to be able to allow that level of energy to come through me?
Mm.
Yeah. And I think that, so these are very much coupled with that we continue to do our own personal work. We just don't do this and go, oh, I can tap into it, because inevitably this whole notion of then I have to let go of some things. I'm going to cut some things away. I'm going to empty these things out of my pack. And inevitably for many of us that we have to face into a certain sense of loss, or even grief, and a certain sense of suffering. You know, we know from many cultural anthropologists that in pre-industrialized societies, it is that when the young men and women went through their initiation phase, it always included some level of pain or suffering. Always. And that I'm not trying to sell pain or suffering here, but at least we become aware of that for ourselves, and we going, oh, this part of my life is complete now. This is ending. I'm moving from childhood into adolescence, into young adulthood, into adulthood. And in order to do that, these conversations, these practices, these habits, these behaviors are no longer useful. And I think that we just don't drop those and then move ahead. We allow ourselves to feel the deep emotions that come from that kind of transition. So that to understand our own suffering helps us understand the process of healing through suffering, and to have compassion for others suffering too.
Yeah. Well, that I think is important because, it for me adds a sort of this perspective around our own growth, that it's not all kind of, it's not all kind of sweetness and light and ever increasing degrees of freedom. Like that there is a sort of side of yes, we're growing, we're getting more freedom, but yeah, that there's loss along the way. And like I'm just thinking of my own experience where I don't know, like 18 months, a couple of years ago, this sense of losing, not quite trusting that I could control life in the way that I thought I could, that I could control things, and that that I could make things happen through will. And like that was pretty scary to open to that, that actually there was something else going on, and the loss of, coming to terms with that loss of that part of me that thought, through will, through effort, I can control the world and build my life. And there's a kernel of truth to that. But anyway, it was, yeah. So I'm just thinking that's what comes up as you share.
I think that's really a beautiful distinction. What occurred to me is that, the end of will. Now, do we still have volition and will? Yes. And there's a place that, regarding to what you said, that I can relate to, in the sense that I realized, like, oh, my will is limited. And that means that if I keep moving down that path, does it continually reveal my own limitations? So maybe I can be okay with that. And what does that open for something more? And I think that's really the conversation we're looking at here, is if we put our tips, our techniques, our moves, our waza aside. Waza is a Japanese word for our training thing. I think some Japanese. Is that it means that we're asking then what will be born out of that. It's an end of something, but not the end of a livingness. Huh?
And I just want to kind of bring this conversation to a conclusion by, for people listening in, you mentioned there might be some people who are like really feeling a yearning for something else in their coaching, and then there's others who are just really happy with their training and tools. And but I want to kind of bring it back to like maybe those people, who are like, this is practical what we're talking about too. We're talking about some pretty deep topics, but it's coming back to how this can show up as through us, through our beingness, and the way we can love the coaching client that we're with, and sense into them, and also invite in new possibilities. So I just want to kind of bring that perspective back in, that there's something very practical about what we're talking about.
Very, very practical. I consider myself a very practical and pragmatic person. And what we're doing, I think, is searching for certain kinds of language to describe something that isn't conventional or customary. And in doing that, it can kind of sound like maybe it's a little bit floaty or a little bit without legs. But in fact, I think that it's our birthright. It really is our legacy. So this notion of intuition, or connecting to source, or allowing something to come through us, is really where the center of the human being is. And that modern life in many ways has begun to build a shield or a filter around those things. So it really is I think a returning, or I've used the word a revealing of what's already there, and very practical, direct, and immediate to take care of concerns.
Well, what would you recommend to people listening? Is there something you would recommend if you're interested in this? Like start practicing something, or this is what you can look out for or do before you coach. And yeah.
Well, what's been instrumental and constitutive to my path is having a long-term practice. And I think that there's probably a number of ways, but this is my center of gravity. And one long-term practice has been the practice of meditation, which I still do. And that this allows us to go deeper and deeper into the well, and to at a, either at a daily basis to go, oh, what is moving through me now? How do I collect myself? How do I disperse myself? How do I focus myself? What are the concerns that are coming up that are just habitual? And what are they that have to do with this time in my life? The other practice is a practice that is done like in a partner practice, where you're standing and you're moving with somebody, and standing and moving with somebody requires then that you're not just fundamentally looking at your own process, mind, body, spirit, somatic process, but that you're connected to that while you're attending to another. Either if it's in a martial art form that they're coming at you with an attack, whether it could be like a Tai Chi form where there's not going to be an attack, but a practice of really unifying, or Qigong, a unifying practice with somebody. And it could be some dancing, could be samba, who knows? But you're always getting that reflection back and forth. And in that reflection, you begin to build on something. You begin to kind of excavate that space that has filled this source, and that you allow that for you to just become the music, become the dance, become your opponent.
Oh, yeah. Great. Well, this is a great place to kind of begin to bring things to a close, I think. So I just want to thank you for the conversation today. It's been so rich.
Yeah, you too, Joel. For me, it's heartening that I've been part of your programs for some years now, and this really feels like a natural, logical ordering of what's next, both in your programs, and I think that it's all of us to look at what stage is coaching now. At what stage are we at with coaching, and has it moved out of childhood, and is it moving out of adolescent stage, and inside of that, how do we connect with this larger field that we're proposing here? So this conversation, this piece that you're doing now, seems very, very timely.
I totally concur with that. It's something I was sensing in the field, talking to people, and everyone I've been talking to about it has been like, totally excited about it. And, I do feel like it's the field is ready for this conversation more explicitly, or that it's of the times, especially when we look at, everything that's going on in the world, all the opportunities, but all the crises we're facing, and the intensity of change. And I think it's evoking even more intensely a connection to some of these to this part of us that we've been exploring today. So yeah, I agree.
So I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and if you're inspired to bring your coaching to this deeper level, coaching from source, how do you have more of that in your coaching? Then you can, I invite you to take a look at our online training program. It's called Coaching from Source. And it's all about how do you apply this in your coaching. We've got an amazing faculty of teachers, including Richard. We've got Karen Kinsey-House, Michael Neal, Jim Defmer, John Prendergast, Katie Hendricks, and they're all going to show you exactly how they do it. So what do you get in the program? Well, it's going to be delivered through live, interactive online video classes. So you can participate from wherever you are in the world. And they're all recorded, so you can watch them back and keep learning and growing from it. There's going to be transcripts of all those sessions. There's going to be interactive workbooks so you can deepen your learning. You're going to be put into practice groups with coaches from all around the world. We've got over 200 coaches who've signed up so far to join us. And you're going to get to meet these coaches and be able to practice with them. So it's a really extensive, interactive online program. if you're interested to know more, enrollment's now open. You can head to www.coachesrising.com/coaching from source. And the course runs from October the 11th till December the 15th.